So without further ado, I'm very excited to present our speaker for today. So today we have with us Trish Blinn, and Trish is an occupational therapist at the Cancer Rehab and Survivorship Program at the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre. She received her Master's of Occupational Therapy from the University of Toronto, Bachelor of Kinesiology from the University of Calgary, and Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of British Columbia. In her role at Princess Margaret, she supports her clients' recovery in a variety of domains, including physical rehabilitation, fatigue management, exercise counseling, psychosocial support, and return to work counseling. Trish is passionate about cancer rehabilitation, and through her clinical practice, lectures, and patient education, her goal is to maximize function and quality of life for anyone who has been impacted by cancer. So Trish, I will pass it over to you for the rest of our presentation.
Great, thanks for the intro, Vanitha, and thank you so much everyone for joining me today. I do have to apologize if I'm looking awkwardly off to the side. I thought I was going to have my speaker notes in front of me, but I've had to have them beside me, which is kind of an ergonomics faux pas, but I'll do the best I can. So welcome to my presentation on ergonomics and postural pitfalls. Before I start, I just want to say a really, really big thank you to my friends and colleagues, Zoe, Jess, and Lydia. They have really unique expertise in ergonomics, and they do a lot of on-site ergonomic assessments, and they were willing to chat with me about tips and tricks and things that they see coming up, sharing their really valuable experience. And it's definitely made this presentation, I think, a lot more enriching. And also a thank you to my partner, Erin, who was able to review this presentation with more of a physiotherapy lens, which was kind of cool. And he also lent himself as a model for some pictures of demonstrations of concepts I'll be talking about, which I really appreciate. So here's a table of contents just to let you know where I'm going to be going today. I hope to give you a bit of a foundation in posture and basic anatomy. Also some tips for ergonomics. Of course, ergonomics is really going to be the real meat and potatoes of this presentation, and that's ergonomics for working at home as well as in the office. I'm also going to be trying to give you some strategies for applying these because there's one thing to understand the strategy, the application is another thing. And I also want to touch base at the end a little bit about posture when we're using our smartphones. There was lots more I was hoping to fit in today, but it turns out that I had a lot I wanted to say about this topic. I didn't want to miss out on everything, so we're really just going to be focusing on those things for today. Before we keep going, I also want to mention what I'm not going to be talking about. So I'm not going to be talking about specific brands that I think that you should buy, or kind of exactly which model of ergonomic chair or standing desk. I will, however, be giving you helpful knowledge and concepts to help to guide you when you are looking for these items. But remember, there's really no one-size-fits-all formula. The most important thing is to kind of consider the concepts and then your own unique situation when you make a decision. So sorry if anyone was hoping for any recommendations like that. All right, so let's begin posture basics. But first, why are we even talking about posture in the first place? So when I'm working in physical rehab, I often tell my clients that doing their exercise program is great, but it's really about how they hold themselves every day that's going to have a tremendous impact on their well-being. If you think about it, rehab exercises might take anywhere from 5 to 60 minutes, but if you're in an awful posture for the whole other 23 hours of the day, you're certainly not going to feel or look your best. So it probably comes at no surprise that posture can have a big impact on the amount of pain that you're feeling in your body. But it can also actually impact your mobility and your ability to recover function after treatments and surgeries. So for example, I often see clients that have a reduced range of motion in their shoulder post-surgery. So if it's safe for you, if you want to try this with me, try slouching, so just rounded shoulder posture, and try to lift your arm up. You might notice it doesn't go too high. Now try sitting nice and tall, shoulders over your hips, and then lift your arm up. Our postural foundation makes a big difference. You'll notice your arm probably goes a lot higher in this position. So of course, proper posture and ergonomics reduces your chance of injury and can help you to better recover from previous injuries. But something I don't think we actually think about enough is how much posture impacts our energy and our overall concentration. And this is really important, especially for those of us that are trying to manage brain fog and cancer-related fatigue. When we slouch, we're actually compressing our lung cavity, and this prevents us from taking full, deep breaths. There's less oxygen that's going to our muscles, and this can make us feel a lot more fatigued. But there's also less oxygen that's going to our brains, which makes it really hard to concentrate. So if you're sitting at your work desk and feeling like you're completely fading, this might be a cue from your body, meaning that you need to check in with your posture. And with all these factors, posture really does play a role in your overall health and even into your emotional state. There's studies showing that good posture can make you feel more confident, happier, and more resilient against life's challenges. Have I convinced you that posture is important yet? I hope so. Let's move along to anatomy of the spine. So your spine is composed of 33 vertebrae, and they're all stacked one on top of the other. And they move against each other, and this allows you to rotate your spine, bend, twist, and flex. They're made out of a solid, strong vertebral body at the front, and they have a hollow tube at the back, and that's where your spinal cord goes through. They're also connected at the back by facet joints, which you can kind of think of like the hinges of the spine. And these have little holes that allow your nerves to pass through. In between your vertebrae are what's called intervertebral discs. So you can kind of think of them like jelly donuts because they're soft, but they're a lot softer on the inside, a little bit harder on the outside. And these provide cushioning and shock absorption in between the vertebral bodies. It's also important to note that our backs are not completely straight. In fact, if they were, we would fall right over. There's 4 natural curves of the spine. So there's the sacral that's at the bottom. There's the lumbar, which is basically our low back, the thoracic, which is our upper back, and the cervical or cervical, which is essentially our neck. These curves are so important because they help us to stay balanced or to be upright. And they make our back stronger, and they give us more shock absorption. Have you ever wondered why doorways and bridges tend to be designed in an arch shape? Well, it's because the arch is actually an extremely resilient and strong structure. And this can be seen not only in architecture, but in nature, so in our backs. And that's why it's so important to preserve these natural curves of the spine. Now, let's take a look at some very common postural examples where these curves might be flattened or kind of overly exaggerated. Do any of these look familiar to you? The first one, sway back, is kind of like our cowboy stance. So we do it because it's easy to do. We let go of engaging our core or abdominal muscles and our belly juts out. But if we do this for a long period of time, it can create an exaggeration of our low back or lumbar spine, meaning a lot of pressure in that area. In the second one, lumbar lordosis, there's a similar relaxation of the belly, but in this one, we actually let our booty come out behind us. I often see people do this in sitting as well, especially if they're trying to overcompensate for slouching, but maybe going too far in the other extreme. And this also places a lot of pressure on the low back. And then in third position there, we have our old friend, thoracic kyphosis, so often referred to as rounded shoulder posture, or just very simply the slouch. The nature of our often quite sedentary or inactive lifestyles, such as hovering over a computer or a steering wheel, makes this position all too common. And this actually flattens our low back, so it gets rid of that nice, strong, natural curve, and therefore makes us more susceptible to injury and to strain. The last one I have there is forward head carriage. So this can kind of be like a turtling or a jutting out of the head. And this creates a lot of strain on our necks. But it can be greatly reduced with the right environmental and behavioral changes, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But first, what does proper posture look like? So here's some principles to think about when it comes to proper posture, beginning from the head down. So notice the chin in this picture is in, so it's not jutting out like in the previous picture. Notice how the earlobes line up very nicely over top of the shoulders, our shoulders over top of the hips, and the belly button is actually drawn in. So this helps to create a more neutral stance of our pelvis and our hips. Our hips want to be balanced about right over top of the ankles, and we're putting even weight distribution between left and right side. So we're not kind of leaning all the way over to one side. Okay, so now is a really important time to mention that just because this nice neutral posture generally allows our joints and our ligaments to be less stressed, that actually doesn't mean that you need to be in a perfect position every single second of the day. Any posture, whether it's good or bad, if it's held too long, is going to wear out our joints and will cause pain. And this is especially the case if we become very rigid and tense, trying to keep a good posture rather than being relaxed and letting our posture be more dynamic. It's good to think of slouching like a piece of chocolate cake. So if I haven't had a piece of chocolate cake in a while, if I eat one piece, it'll probably taste pretty good, and it might even make me feel a bit better for a couple minutes. Same goes for slouching. If I slouch from time to time, it's okay. It might be a brief rest that will make me feel a bit better before I go back to a different posture. But if I start to eat chocolate cake every day, or even maybe for every meal, eventually I'm not going to feel too great, nor am I going to feel very healthy. So seeing as most of us tend to just naturally slouch a lot, the first step is fostering awareness of when we are slouching. So maybe noticing that we're overindulging in that chocolate cake, and then taking action to incorporate better posture. What is truly the best type of posture though? Definitely, I would say a dynamic one. So our bodies are made to move. Inactivity is a major contributor to pain and is the #1 cause of low back pain. A dynamic posture is one that changes often. So for example, office chairs that have floating backs that allow you to lean forwards and backwards and move with you are an example of a tool that can help you to keep your posture dynamic. Also, desks that allow you to adjust them so you can go from sitting to standing. It's really important to break up the amount of time that you spend seated. So the ideal is to take a break from sitting every 30 minutes or so. So maybe set an alarm on your phone or an alarm clock to hold you accountable. Fitbits are always really good reminders for this as well. They tend to vibrate when we've been sitting too long. And if every 30 minutes is just not possible for your job, that's totally fair, but take a moment to think about what is. So maybe you get up and move before and after every meeting, or maybe when you have to go to the bathroom, you take the bathroom that's a little bit extra far away. You have to walk down a hallway maybe. If you're one of those people that's working from home and the bathroom is literally 2 steps away, maybe you take the opportunity while in the bathroom and do 5 to 10 squats, for example, if that's something that you're able to do. Another life hack that I've learned recently is if you have Zoom meetings, but you don't have to have your camera on, this is a great opportunity to turn the camera off, stand up, and maybe do some stretches. Really think reflectively on your workday and about when would be a good time to sneak in some movement, because even a little bit can go a long way. And during these breaks, you might want to think about stretching the parts of your body that can get really stiff with prolonged sitting. So that includes your neck, your shoulders, your wrists, and the backs of your legs or your hamstrings. And when we slouch, the muscles and tissues of our chest actually become super tight, and it serves to keep pulling us forwards. And meanwhile, the muscles in the back tend to elongate and weaken. So that's why it's really important to do stretches that stretch out our chest and also strengthen our back, or the muscles that help to hold us upright. And along with the physical, mental breaks are really important as well. There's actually a whole segment of ergonomics called psychosocial ergonomics, which is really interesting, but we can't get into today. But stepping away from your work intermittently to clear your mind or do something you enjoy is so important for your well-being and can actually improve your health and your productivity in the long run. So now I'm going to be talking about posture at work and tips and tricks for improving ergonomics in the office, even if that office now happens to be your living room or bedroom. Before I begin, just a little disclaimer. So some of these principles may seem kind of intuitive, and I'm sure everyone has different experiences here. Some of you might have heard some before. They might not all necessarily be earth-shattering, but what is so much more important than just knowing or understanding the principle is applying it. So I really want you to reflect today, not just on what these principles are, but how it can be applied to your unique situation. And if you get a strategy or an idea, write it down. This way you won't forget, and you're also more likely to follow through with it. Make a goal of coming out of this webinar with at least 2 to 3 strategies that you might just try. Often it's easier to start with 2 or 3 than start to try to change 20 things all at once. Even one little change can actually make a big difference. There is no one-size-fits-all formula, so really draw on the principles that I talk about today, but try to make these strategies your own. Okay, so before I even change slides, I want you to think about where your feet are right now and not where you just moved them to once I said that. Were they tucked under your chair? Were they maybe resting on the wheels of your ergonomic chair? Were they floating in space? If they were any of these things, I can assure you that you are not alone. And creating awareness of these little postural habits is actually the first step in changing them. So I'm going to build you up from the ground up, starting with the feet. The best position for your feet to be in is flat on the floor, right below the knees, with an even weight distribution on both sides. The floor ideally should be firm, and having your feet in this flat, firm position actually impacts the whole rest of your body. So that includes the position of your pelvis all the way up to your spine. And having your feet flat on the ground makes it easier for you to move around and change your position. So again, facilitating that dynamic posture, which I'm a big fan of. If your feet can't comfortably touch the floor, of course, one of the most common solutions is to adjust your seat height to go lower. If your seat doesn't adjust, you can just build the floor up to you. So this might take the form of a footstool. I've been told that most offices actually do have footstools, kind of spare ones lying around, but it's really a matter of asking and finding out where they're hidden. If there is no stool available, or if it's just really not the right height, what you can do is just use what you have on hand. So right now I have textbooks underneath my feet. Textbooks is a great solution, but you could also use an old shoebox. You could use stacks of printer paper, which is basically a staple in any office. And as someone who is 5'1", like on a good day, and my feet are just chronically always dangling in space, so I'm in chairs, I can assure you that having textbooks under my feet has actually made a big difference in my comfort and in my pain levels. In terms of your knees, they should be bent at about 90 degrees. And this is the first 90 of what I'm going to be referring to as the 90-90-90 rule. Also important, which less people know about, is to have about 3 fingers width of distance between your inner knee and that edge of the chair. And the reason is that you actually have a lot of really important nerves and vasculature that pass through the sensitive, rather unprotected area. And if you have compression there, it can cause pain or numbness in your lower extremities. So here I have some illustrations of some of those classic postural mishaps that happen when we're on those ergonomic chairs. So for example, those feet sneaking up onto the wheels, hovering in space. And then at the third picture there is my simple textbook fix. No, it doesn't necessarily need to be an anatomy and physiology textbook, but I did enjoy the irony of using it for this example. Moving on now to the position of the hips. So your chair height should be such that the level of your hips is about the same height as your knees, if not slightly higher, but making the angle between your thighs and your torso about 90 degrees. So that's our second 90 of the 90-90-90 rule. So really, it can be 90 to about 130-degree angle. So for example, if the chair back, you can lean back slightly up to 130, that's fine too. For those of you who are quite tall, this can be a bit more challenging, so you will likely need a higher chair. But if you do get a higher chair, it's important to note that your thighs don't press into your desk, so make sure that there's space. The way that you sit in your chair is very important too. So remember to actually use the whole seat and not just perch on the edge of it like a lot of us do. I'm definitely guilty of that a lot of the time when I'm at work. You also want the seat to be firm to provide proper support for your pelvis. So for example, those lazy boy chairs, you don't want to be using those at home. You really tend to sink into those. It does not facilitate a good neutral posture. In terms of our low back, it should be supported in a way that supports that natural lumbar curve, which I was explaining to you before, and in a way that doesn't exaggerate the curve. So this is to relieve fatigue and discomfort. And many ergonomics chairs have low back support built in, and if this is comfortable for you, that's great. Another option is what's called an obus form cushion. So this is a contoured cushion that you can add to your office chair. You don't actually need to buy anything fancy though. You could really just use a pillow from home, a rolled up towel, or a sweater. And one common mistake is not placing these supports in the right place. So just remember exactly where your low back is. So low back isn't up at your bra strap. It's also not down at your tailbone. These are common mistakes that we often see. I have an arrow in that top right picture showing where the low back is and where you would want to put that support. In terms of your armrests on your chair should be positioned in a way that allows your elbows to be bent at 90 degrees. And you guessed it, this concludes the last 90 of our 90-90-90 rule. So just to summarize, that's a 90-degree angle of the knees, 90-degree angle of the thighs and the torso, and then a 90-degree angle of the elbows. Can it be slightly greater than 90? Yes, that's okay, but I wouldn't recommend any less than 90. Remember that when your arms are resting in the armrest, they should be resting lightly, so you don't want to be leaning into them like crutches. And they should facilitate your shoulders being nice and relaxed away from the ears. And this is something that's really important to monitor because it can be a large contributor to neck pain. But if you've ever noticed that your shoulders tend to come up when you're stressed, so much so you're almost wearing them as earrings, the first step is to really notice and become aware when you're doing it and to relax them down, cue yourself or ask someone else to cue you if they catch you in that position. And having proper armrests that are in a lower position can help to facilitate this as well. Another little tip is to actually not rest your arms on your armrests while typing. Armrests are more there for when we're taking breaks from typing. And we're going to move on to the wrist and the keyboard now. So your keyboard should be about 2 centimeters below the height of your wrists. And this allows for your wrists to be in a neutral position. So that way they're not overly extended and they're not overly flexed. Neutral wrists are very important for protecting against common workplace injuries. So for example, carpal tunnel syndrome, or if you have carpal tunnel, this can help to reduce your symptoms. When your arms and hands are in a resting position, the hands should be able to just lightly hover over the keyboard, and your mouse should be at the same arm height as the keyboard and directly next to it, so right close by. A question that commonly comes up is about using a split keyboard. So split keyboards are used to reduce the amount of what we call ulnar deviation, which is the movement of basically bending your wrist towards the pinky side. The answer, as it is for most things in ergonomics, is that it really depends. So changing the type of keyboard can be a huge adjustment, especially when you think about how many hours you spend typing in a day. So for example, maybe up to 6 or 7 hours, depending on your job. And if it's 5 days a week and you've been doing it for years, that's a lot of muscle memory that's built up in terms of your typing. The most important concepts to remember when it comes to this is to get those elbows around 90 degrees and to keep those wrists in neutral. Split keyboards might work for some people, but for other people, it's way too hard to adjust to such a new typing style, and then they end up just completely not using it. So another option, if you do find that this side of your wrist on the pinky side gets quite sore, is just to think about moving your wrist as a whole instead of bending the wrist to type. It's also important to take a look at your work chair as a whole, because often we don't realize just how many features can be adjusted. The height is one that tends to be pretty intuitive. Most of us will change the height, but check to see if you can adjust the armrests as well. So some armrests let you change the height of the armrest, but also even the angle or the width of the armrests. And again, armrests are not to be used as crutches, so we're not going to be leaning into them. People often ask if gel pads can be helpful. And again, it really depends. So the most important rule is to keep that wrist in a neutral position. If that gel pad builds up the armrest such that you're having to bend your wrist, then that's probably not the best option for you. But if the gel pad is comfortable and allows that wrist to be in neutral, then it's probably okay. It probably won't hurt. In terms of head positioning, you should be about 45 to 75 centimeters away from your screen. If you're like me and 45 to 75 centimeters actually means nothing to you and you need something more tangible, I looked this up, and on the average height of length of someone's elbow to the tip of their middle finger, it's kind of on the lower end of this. So I joke with some of my clients that if you can like give yourself an elephant trunk and you're like slapping your screen, you're definitely too close. But an easier way to think about it is just to be a full arm's length away from the computer. And if you're having trouble seeing at that distance, you might want to check the accessibility features of your computer. So often you can increase font size. Sometimes you can even have the text read to you. There's lots of great softwares that are out there now. In terms of the height of the monitor, you want your monitor positioned such that you're gazing at the top third of your screen. If you're working on a laptop, this is going to take some adjustments, but I'll be getting into that for the next slide. Another important note, if you spend any time on the phone, is to have a headset. Of course, avoid ever holding that phone between your ear and your shoulder. This can cause a lot of pain over time. Another important consideration, if you're often referring to an external document, so for example, transcribing or something like that, is to have a document holder or anything that can hold that document at the same height as the monitor right beside it. It's important to keep everything that you use within easy reach, and that's to avoid any excess rotation or strain on our spine and our necks. So when you're about to start your workday, really think critically about the tasks that you're going to need to do and just try to arrange everything right away so it's close by within easy reach. Another important consideration is to think about alternating the tasks you do at work. So this is quite important because a lot of workplace injuries are from overuse or doing that same repetitive motion over and over again. So for example, instead of typing for 4 hours straight, think about including other tasks within that time frame. So for example, making phone calls or sorting documents. Long periods of continuous work should always be broken up into chunks by using alternate tasks. So this slide is to illustrate some options for making your setup more ergonomic if you're working off of a laptop. Although laptops are super convenient and portable, they can be a nightmare when it comes to our posture. So if the keyboard is low enough so that we can have that 90-degree angle of our elbows, often we're slouched down a ton, we're looking down, and we have rounded shoulder posture. If the screen is high enough so we can have that nice alignment staring at the top third of the screen, often we have to be reaching up with little T-Rex arms to be typing. So it's really important to, if you can, to get an external keyboard for that laptop. Here in that picture, and I guess all three pictures, you can see the external keyboard is in that pull-out tray of the desk to allow for the elbows to be at 90 degrees. And if the laptop is too low, you can get things that raise the laptop up higher on your desk. There's lots that you can purchase, or you can just use what you have at home. So textbooks are a great example. In that second and third picture there, we also have the use of yoga blocks if you have ones laying around. Again, you can use those stacks of printer paper. You can use a shoebox. Almost everyone has something that they can put on the table to build the laptop up. The same principle can be used for iPads or tablets as well. Often there's holders that will hold it for you. But even if you don't have a holder, you can just use items you have at home to prop it up. Another important consideration when we're talking about ergonomics is our eyes. So it's probably no surprise for you to hear that prolonged screen use can really be straining on your eyes. And trust me, I feel really bad saying this when you are literally watching this presentation on your computer. Sorry. But one helpful trick to follow and maybe apply during this presentation is what we call the 20-20-20 rule. So this means that for every 20 minutes of computer work or viewing that you do, you gaze at an on-moving point that's 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And this simple trick can be really helpful for reducing eye strain. And I mentioned it earlier, but I really do highly recommend that you check out the accessibility settings of your laptop and other devices to see if you can adjust the lighting. So most devices emit what's called blue light, which can be pretty detrimental to our eyes, especially over long periods of time. But most devices also have features such as night shift mode that decrease the amount of blue light that's emitted. Every device is a little different, but you can often find this either in your accessibility features or just simply by Googling your device and write in how to reduce eye strain. Often it comes up with a really helpful step-by-step page of how you can change your settings. You can also request to have prescription glasses that filter out blue light. I've actually heard that most optometrists, this is a standard question to ask you or offer you now. I've been advised against buying the more cheap generic blue light glasses that I guess you can get at Dollarama, or you can get screens that cover your computer, just because you don't really know about the quality of the plastic that's been used. So if you're having to look through poor quality plastic, that's not really going to help your eye strain or your vision either. Another important consideration is avoiding glare. So this might mean partially closing your blinds to avoid the sun from reflecting onto your screen, or changing the position of the screen itself so that it's perpendicular to where that light is coming from or at a 90-degree angle. And the glare might not always be coming from a natural source. So I had a colleague that was getting really bad headaches at work, and she eventually tried covering up the big fluorescent light that was positioned right above her screen, and her headaches completely went away. So it's important to really be aware of what else is in our environment that might be contributing to our discomfort or our pain, and see if there's anything that we can do to modify, adjust, or eliminate that thing. Another strategy for reducing your screen time can also be to use dictation or voice recognition software for typing. So when you're literally just verbally talking and then your computer is typing for you what you're saying. These features are becoming more common and more accessible. I wouldn't be surprised if your device already currently has it. And again, there's also devices that will read text to you so that you don't have to be always looking at your screen. A simple Google search for your device will probably come up with some good options for you. The last thing I want to touch on, just while we're in the domain of the head, is hearing and sound. So try to find a workspace that's quiet and free from bothersome noises. I know not everyone has that option though. So in this case, noise canceling headphones might actually be your best friend. And this is especially a good consideration for anyone that's getting back to work but still has some effects from brain fog or chemo brain post-treatment. Adjusting your auditory environment can make a big difference in terms of your concentration and your fatigue levels. I just want to touch on a couple other considerations because I feel like these are probably questions that might come up. The first one is on standing desks. So honestly, I think standing desks are fabulous, but I definitely wouldn't opt for a standing only desk. Definitely go for an adjustable desk where you can go from sitting to standing. Again, the best posture is a dynamic posture, so you don't want your desk to force you to be in the same position the entire day. And that being said, an adjustable standing desk is only good if we use the standing feature. So it's important to not go on autopilot, which is so easy to do, where we often forget that we even have that option to stand. So maybe get a colleague or a family member to remind you and hold you accountable to using the standing feature. Another option is to make a sign above your desk, maybe set alarms as reminders, use your phone. And it's not only about using it, but like most things, also how you use it. So if you stand, but you're slouched on your desk the whole time, pressing down into the desk, leaning all the way over into one side, this is not great posture either. So just important to be cognizant of that. If you do spend long periods of time in standing, you might want to consider getting something called an anti-fatigue mat. So these are mats that are made out of a softer, more bendable material that can reduce the amount of strain that are on your joints and ligaments when you're standing. You'll often see them in workplaces where people have to stand a long time. So sometimes I see cashiers using them, for example. Some people that cook a lot or spend a lot of time cooking and standing will put them in their kitchen as well. Another consideration when you're getting a standing desk is to ensure that there's enough length and slack in all of your wires, so that when you do go up to the standing feature, you don't end up just with a blank computer and a bunch of wires on the floor because everything was too short. Unfortunately, I know this one from personal experience, so just something to be mindful of. In terms of standing desk brands, I honestly, as I mentioned before, I can't recommend one over the other. I don't even know enough about the different brands, but I have been told that the prices have come down a lot over the years, which is great. And they're available everywhere now, kind of like from Amazon to IKEA. I was also told that in the first 6 months of the pandemic, apparently there was a standing desk shortage because everyone wanted them. But now that shortage is over, they're available, so we can all get standing desks, yay. And also remember, of course, it's not so much the brand that's important, but it's these principles that we talked about and considering how they fit into your own unique situation. Another thing that commonly comes up is sitting on a yoga ball. So I think yoga balls can be great, but it depends on the person, on the situation. They're only effective if you use them properly. So if you're on the ball, but you're totally slumped forwards and you're kind of like resting your arms on the desk for support all day, it's probably not a good option for you. Other people tend to overcompensate the other way and they go into that lumbar lordosis kind of posture, putting a lot of strain onto the low back. It's also important to remember that when you're on that yoga ball, your postural muscles are working a lot harder than they are when we're sitting in an ergonomic chair. And it's really great to strengthen postural muscles, but they do tend to get fatigued over time. And when muscles get fatigued, that's when we see that poor posture sneaking in that tends to elicit pain. So if you really love your yoga ball or the idea of a yoga ball, I would recommend starting out with just short periods of time on the ball, alternating between the ball and your chair. And maybe as you get more comfortable, you can start to slowly increase those time periods. But I wouldn't say to just spend your whole 8-hour day on that yoga ball. Another common question that comes up is the positioning when it comes to double monitors. So if you use 2 monitors, it's important to really think about which one you actually use the most. It's actually pretty rare that you use both equally, but quite common that people assume they use both equally. So if you're one of those people, you're like, no, I use both equally. Just take note over the next week or so and notice if there is one you tend to favor a bit more. If you really do use both equally, you do want them kind of equally positioned in front of you. But if there's one that you use a bit more, you want that one more towards the center of you with the other one just slightly off to the side. And the whole reasoning behind it is we want to reduce the amount of time that we're spending with our heads in in rotation for long periods of time, because this can create strain. If you use both a monitor and a laptop, you might consider putting the laptop directly below your monitor, or having a holder that elevates the laptop to the exact same height as your computer monitor, or maybe you just build that up using textbooks, for example, and then the laptop's just slightly off to the side if you use it a bit less. And a lot of people aren't aware that they can actually ask their employers for ergonomics assessments. Better ergonomics actually save employers in the long run, because it leads to happier, healthier, and more productive employees. So it's really to their benefit for you to get one. Just ask. As important as the tips that I've laid out are, it'd be even more helpful to get advice from someone who can actually see your work environment, see you, and cater recommendations to really suit your individual needs. COVID's made these types of assessments a little bit less accessible, but if that's the case, maybe you consider asking for one when things are a bit safer. Or I also know that some organizations are offering virtual ergonomics assessments now too. So again, none of these tips are going to be helpful unless you apply them. So think of strategies right now that can serve as reminders for things that you have found helpful so far. Sticky notes are a great strategy. So you can see from this picture of sticky notes that I put above my desk. The best reminders are visible and they're simple and succinct. So not kind of like sentences laid out, but something very simple like 90, 90, 90, or breathe, stretch. Other strategies include putting reminders and alarms in your phone, asking a buddy to remind you or to hold you accountable. Again, there's lots of strategies that were outlined today, so try to pick 2 to 3 to work on to start. Once these become a habit, then maybe you start to employ more. So the last thing I'm going to touch on briefly before we wrap up, so that I can allow time for questions, is smartphone use, because the smartphone slump is something that almost all of us are guilty of if we own a phone. So on average, we tend to spend about 2 to 4 hours of time on our phone per day. And this can cause a lot of wear and tear on our necks. Did you know that when your neck is in a neutral position, that's about 10 to 12 pounds of strain on the joints of your neck? But as soon as that goes into a halfway looking down, kind of 45-degree angle, that becomes 40 pounds on your neck. And as soon as we're looking fully down, like a lot of us do when we're looking on our phones, that's a whole 60 to 70 pounds of weight on your neck. And I cringe now when I see people in that position after knowing that fact. And of course, doing that for a prolonged period of time can be very, very unhealthy for our necks. So just one last tip that I want to send you guys away with is to not fall into the smartphone slump trap, which I have pictured on that far left picture. There's lots of ways to bring your phone closer to your eyes, closer to eye level. One is just to, of course, bend your elbows so it comes up closer. Another way, which I have shown in these pictures, is to just rest your elbows on a table. If that's uncomfortable for the elbows, maybe put pillow or blanket underneath, or a towel. That way you can have the shoulders nice and relaxed, cell phone more at your eye level, so you don't have to go into that forward head carriage or jutting out of the chin. All right, so just to wrap up here, the best type of posture, again, is a dynamic one. So one where you're moving, you're changing positions frequently, you're taking breaks from sitting and from standing as well. It's important to alternate tasks to prevent the chance of overuse injuries, also to keep things interesting and engaging as well. You don't necessarily have to buy anything fancy. You can always use what you have at home. start small and build up. So start with just a couple simple goals and then maybe try to incorporate more once those become habit. And of course, only stick with what works for you, toss away the other things. There really is no one size fits all formula. Everyone is different. So thank you so much for attending today. I do welcome your questions. I'll answer whatever I'm capable of. My apologies if I don't have the answers. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to listen to me tonight.
Thank you so much, Trish. You gave us so many great tips, and I think you walked through a lot of things which sometimes don't come to the forefront when we are working or so into the zone of whatever we're doing, that there are so many little things that we can be mindful of and change and will really help in the long term. So I know I was definitely listening, trying to take notes of those things. So thank you so much for going through all of that. So I think I'm just going to jump